Okay, so to conclude telling you about the monastic conference, the last presentation was by Venerable Jianhu, who is a Taiwanese-born American Buddhist monk. Okay, so he's in the Chinese Chan tradition, and he's the abbot of a temple in Sunnyvale, California, and he got his PhD in computer engineering or something like that, and then decided to become a monastic. So he spoke about what to keep and what to adapt. Because he's lived in Taiwan and he's lived here as a monastic, and he really sees quite clearly the difference in culture. And so he asked us to consider three questions. First, what is the state of our own tradition in Asia right now? Because all of the monastic traditions at the conference, we all have our roots in Asia. So what is happening in our own tradition in Asia at the moment? And then second was when Buddhism came from India, or from whatever intermediate country it came from, into our own, into the Asian tradition, into the Asian country that our tradition is dependent upon. What kind of adaptation happened there? And then third is, now that it's coming from Asia to our country, what kind of adaptation do we think needs to occur? And so in that regard, he talked about the history of Chinese Buddhism, because he answered those three questions in terms of his own tradition, and how Buddhism came to China, the adaptations that were made in the robes, for example, in the fact that the monastics there did gardening, and planted seeds and did agriculture, because that was their way of getting out of the city and getting away from politics. But as a result, they weren't able to go on Pindapat and receive food offerings, so they had to grow their own. And so how, many things change as Buddhism went to China, and now going from China to the US, the kinds of changes that have to be made. Not in the teachings, but in the form. And not in the, purpose of the Vinaya and the spirit of the precepts, but in terms of how we live the precepts in the West. Yeah, that we've got to make certain adaptations. And one person suggested in the discussion that followed that maybe we try and get together and make some adaptations, make a list of them, and kind of act as some kind of body that makes this interpretation for people in the West. But I think most of us decided that actually it's hard to do that for all Western Buddhist monastics, because even with, we're influenced by our different Asian traditions, and also as Westerners we have different inclinations and dispositions. And so I was saying, actually Venerable Jianhu was saying that what they did in China when Buddhism came there is Venerable Bao Xiang wrote up a book of, this is how we live the monastic life in China. And so without changing any of the precepts, because that's kind of a thing that's very difficult to do, making in-house rules about how we're going to live as monastics here. And so those rules that he made were spread pretty much throughout all of China. But doing something in the West that would spread throughout all of the different Buddhist traditions in the West would be very difficult, because of our different conditionings and different Asian connections and so on. So I was saying that here at the Abbey, this is kind of the thing that we're developing. So we have a lot of our own in-house guidelines and ways that we live, because we can't keep certain elements of the precepts completely perfectly, but we're trying to apply the spirit, and so do it in a way where we have some structure around our lives. Because what's happened in the Tibet community mostly is nobody has actually interpreted this and set it up as a structure. And so then it's very loose, and people do all sorts of things until maybe one monastery or the other sets up a rule for their own particular monastery. But then sometimes things have gone on in a certain way for so long that they get changed, but with much difficulty. Okay? And also the conditions in India are very different than here. And so we have to make in-house guidelines that apply to our situation here in the West. But it was a very, very interesting discussion, you know, that we had. So you can see these monastic meetings by people of different traditions, you know, all of us living in the West, are quite rich and quite beneficial. And I don't know if I mentioned it or not, but in the evenings we were having stories of the great masters, meaning our own teachers. And people found this very, very inspiring, you know, how we encountered our teachers, how our teachers trained us, all the little stories and vignettes that happen that show how you actually get trained. Okay, and of course those little vignettes are, everybody laughs at them now, but when they were going on and you were the person, they seemed really serious, you know. So, but it's very good. So these monastic gatherings will continue in the States. The one next year is on forming community, which I think will be very interesting and very helpful. So again, I think this is something really everybody should rejoice at, that the monastics from the different Buddhist traditions are really coming together and becoming friends and supporting each other and discussing things that are very relevant to all of us in a very helpful way.